Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. So, one of the biggest challenges in lending and finance today isn't actually access to data, it's making sense of it. Lenders, private credit firms, investors, they're all flooded with information. Financial statements, tax returns, borrowing certificates, portfolio reports, emails, PDFs, spreadsheets, you name it. The data exists, but it's often trapped in formats that require countless hours of manual review and analysis. So the result for us is lower decisions, higher operating costs, and increased risk. So as AI is continuing to reshape everything, including the financial industry, one of the biggest opportunities isn't actually that it's replacing people. It's really eliminating a lot of manual work that prevents teams and businesses from focusing on underwriting, portfolio management, and strategic decision making. So today's guest has experienced this challenge from both sides. Before founding his current company, he spent nearly a decade building a private credit platform that managed more than 20,000 portfolio companies and facilitated over 6 billion in transaction volume. Through that experience, he saw firsthand all of the inefficiencies of manual data extraction and reporting across PDFs, emails, and spreadsheets in what he calls the PDF tax. That pain point became the foundation for his next venture. Keith Smith is the CEO and co-founder of GoodStream, a company focused on transforming how private capital firms manage and analyze portfolio data through AI-powered automation and real-time intelligence. And today, GoodStream is really using AI to turn fragmented information into audit-ready intelligence for private capital firms. In fact, in its first year, GoodStream demonstrated that AI can reliably extract and organize information from complex financial documents and help investment firms reduce manual data entry, improve reporting accuracy, and gain faster visibility into their portfolios. Keith, that sounds so technical. Oh my gosh, welcome to the show. So excited to have you here. AI is such a front and center topic right now. So talk to us a little bit about that beginning journey, what you saw and how you got to really the PDF tax and wanting to form GoodStream.
Thank you. That is a great setup, and I appreciate the lead in there and telling the story because it's packed with all sorts of learnings that I've had there. And so, thanks for having me, Krista. I think that it is the experience that I had with seeing how we have all this great data, all this great insights, but it's buried in emails and PDFs and spreadsheets was always a frustration to me. And this was from my experience in leading a private credit firm back in 2015 that I ran for 9 years. And it was just this constant challenge. And we knew that if we could get the data out, we could do really interesting things with it. But the data was buried in all of these documents, and the cost associated with having a person open up every single one of these documents, painstakingly pull out all the data, making sure that it is accurate, which usually means then you need to do a double blind version of this where you have two humans do the same effort. It was just too expensive. And so to a large degree, a lot of this data has historically throughout the financial sector has just kind of sat and not been utilized. And you pull out the contract when you go, oh, there's an issue. Let me go see what's actually going on with this. And you get to that. But there's a very difficult ability to be able to really see across all of that. And that is a problem that doesn't just exist across investing overall, but it really exists almost exclusively within the private capital markets. And so in public markets, everything is quantified. All the data that we get is quantified. It's all structured. We as investors and public entities, et cetera, we're all supposed to get the same data at the same time. In the private markets, it's very, very different. And at the root of all of that is the fact that so much of our data is buried in these documents, and it needs to go and live in a place where it can now be utilized. And in the world of AI, there's all sorts of great promise. And that's what I wanted to, talk about at least a little bit today is how exciting it is for the industry overall to be able to unlock that data and make it usable now.
So do you feel like people are really excited about AI or that there's still, some kind of fear? Because I'm running into people who say like, yeah, AI. And they're like, where's the robot? I'm going to hook it up and it's going to fix everything. And then other people that are like, yeah, I saw Terminator. I'm good. Like we're okay. So where do you feel like that the balance is resting right now?
Yeah, I think and to answer your question, do people love it or hate it? I think the answer is yes. Is the unfortunate answer, which is that, and a lot of times it's not just that one group loves it and another group hates it. It's that sometimes we will love it and hate it in the same day as the same person. And so it's an interesting, unique new technology. And so we are all, I think, feeling a lot of emotions about it. But yeah, I think the short answer is certainly in America. If you look at the polling data, if you look at the sentiment data, I think Americans are concerned about what AI is going to do for our autonomy, for our jobs, for our humanity. What are they going to do for our relationships? Is it going to replace me? I think is a core question we all have. Is it going to replace the human creativity and the human genius? And these are all super valid questions that we need to be asking because we have this, what feels almost like an alien intelligence that is coming to life in front of us, and we need to be thoughtful about it. We can't just be blind and say, well, all technology is good, so I'm sure it's going to be fine. We have lots of historical examples of when technology has not been great. So we as humans are still responsible for making sure that we shepherd this thing right to be able to have it help us in our lives and not make our lives worse as a society overall. Yeah, I think the answer is that it's still up in the air and it's changing every day. But generally speaking, I think that the sentiment is kind of negative towards AI overall at this point.
So, I use AI a lot for what I'm doing just in day-to-day life. And, I'm finding that it makes mistakes. And so the question that I would like to know is, do you consider it to be that, digital superhero? Or like in the case of times it makes recommendations for me and it contradicts something it just said a minute before. So is it digital superhero or is it really that idiot that's not computing things correctly at times?
Yeah, unfortunately, the answer again is yes. It is the smartest dumb guy you know, or maybe it's the dumbest smart guy you know, depending on the day and depending on the task. And so, what's interesting, I think, and one of the things that is an important kind of paradigm to understand about AI versus everything else that we've ever done with computers is that everything else that we have done with computers prior to now has always been in what we would refer to as a deterministic system. It's like a calculator. If I type 9 times 9, I am always going to get the same answer. It doesn't matter how many different computers I type that on, how many different calculators I type that on, I'm always going to get a very deterministic answer. Well, we as humans are not deterministic. If we go and ask 1,000 humans what is the answer to 9 times 9, we're probably going to get several different answers. We're going to get the right answer predominantly, but we're probably going to get some wrong answers. And so it turns out that AIs think a little bit more like humans. And so they tend to think in a non-deterministic way or a probabilistic way. And so it's like, yeah, the answer is most likely going to be, 81, but, maybe it's 89 one day. And so as a result, sometimes you will get incorrect answers, and usually not for a question as simple as what's 9 times 9, but it's representative of the kind of thing where if you ask a complex question to 10 different AIs, you're probably going to get 9 different versions of the answer. And so as a result, what we have to do is we have to put a harness around these AIs in the same exact way that we would think about it if we were going to be building a team of people to go and do a particular task. If we had no process, no controls, no documentation, if we didn't tell them what our goals were, what our objectives were, we just said, go do this thing, we can be pretty sure that if we did that same thing 10 different times, even if we did it with the same team, we'd probably get a lot of different results and a lot of different answers as a result of that project. So what has to happen when we are working with people in complex situations like that is we put together a documentation to say this is what we're trying to accomplish. We put together rules, we put together policies and procedures and structure and ways that we communicate. And as a result, after we put all these processes into place, and typically within a business context, then we can be pretty sure that even though we have a bunch of non-deterministic humans, we can probably get deterministic kinds of answers. And we are, as an engineering group of folks that are working on AI, we are in the process of doing effectively the same exact thing, but for computers and for AI. We are putting a harness or these controls and policies and structures around them so that they understand what the goal is, they understand what we're trying to accomplish, they understand what the rules are, and they understand the context of the data that they need in order to make decisions. And as a result, we can be much more likely to start to get deterministic answers out of these machines. And that starts to be then, the difference between wow, this almost seemed incredible, but it's given me, incorrect answers to, oh my goodness, this is a miraculous new system that can do all sorts of tasks that used to take me a long time to do.
So I feel like what I'm seeing in the news, and a lot of the reporting is really beginning to to create what I call FUD, which is like fear, uncertainty, and doubt surrounding something. And I feel like sometimes as humans and people, that's where we always start with something new. So I've seen the news deliver a lot of reports that just kind of leave you with this feeling of like shock and awe. So where do you think we really should be going to get the truth about what is happening with AI?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult question to answer. I can tell you what I do, but you're right that there's a perverse incentive for media in general to get us to be excited about something. And so if the headline is that an AI has replaced a bunch of tasks, or if the story is that an AI has replaced a bunch of tasks, then the headline is probably going to insinuate that, hey, you're probably going to lose your job. When in reality, maybe what we've done is we've taken the most boring, mundane tasks that a person does and automated them so they get to do more interesting things. But in that case, then the headline might be, can you believe that Jane has taken Fridays off, and letting Cloud do her work for her? Should she really be getting paid for this, instead? So I think whatever, kind of good is going to come out, if there's going to be good that comes out of this, there's an incentive to probably lead with a story that is more FUD, based. And so I think it's good for us to just kind of keep that as context generally, is that the press is usually not going to sing the praises of a new technology. They're usually going to point out the things that are going to go sideways in society. So that's at least a good starting place. I will say that for new information, the best source of information on AI is from AI itself. And so I have a highly curated, we'll call it a skill, which is a skill is basically just a prompt that I've iterated on and tweaked a bunch, and made it so that every morning I get a nice little news digest, and I call it Keith's Capsule because it's personalized to me, and it's all the things that I need to know, and it's including what are the latest things that are going on with AI, and what's going on in my particular industry, what's going on with my competitive set, what are the stories that I would personally be interested in. And this is just a prompt that I've just optimized and improved over time. And so every morning I get a unique digest of stories that is curated for me to be able to, to make sure that I stay up to speed. And so that's what I do. I also spend a fair amount of time on Twitter. I would say, generally speaking, that's a hellscape, and it's a horrible place you should stay away from. It also happens to be the place where a lot of really smart AI engineers are having conversations. And so if you follow people and then you move away from the For You and you just go to the Following tab, which is probably a good rule in any social media platform, by the way, is quit letting the algorithm feed you. Just follow what you follow, and you get to pick who you follow. And then you start to be able to really, I think, cut out a lot of the noise and get to the heart of people that you believe, that you trust, that you have confidence in. And you, on the Following tab within Twitter, TikTok, you name it, go there and you'll probably get a better news feed.
So, and that's actually really great advice, because I've noticed with the algorithms that there can be bias. So it's not necessarily always showing you the things that you would like to see. So I think in a lot of cases you have to keep digging to find what you're really looking for, and not just trust that what you're being served is all that there is out there.
Yes.
So with respect to the work that you've done with AI and portfolio data, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about data readiness. So how does AI know about the deals that you've done? What you like to do and what you have done inside your portfolio.
Yeah, great question. So we, if I kind of start from and back up a little bit, we are starting from this premise that there is a bunch of really great high quality data that's buried in documents, and some of it's deal documents, and so our customers are private capital investors, and so that's like venture capitalists, and active angels is kind of the category that we are starting with. That will eventually include family offices, and it will also include private debt, and so on the private debt side, there's a very big market there. It's probably more complex, but for now we're starting really focused on equity types investors. So that's kind of the lens that I'm looking through as I talk about this. But there's a bunch of data, a bunch of documents rather, that contain data. We want to be able to get that data out of there, and we want to be able to make sure that data is structured in a way that will make sense, so that either a user can look at that data and see reports and see pretty charts and graphs, or that we can take that data and we can feed it into an AI so that it can do overall assessments. And if we just give the AI a pile of a couple thousand documents, it's not going to be able to make sense of that. But if we take all the relevant data out of there, associate it, put it all in the right place, and then give it to an AI, then it can make sense of that. So how do we get to that place? Well, historically, it was just a very difficult thing to do. If you take a 170-page contract, which is probably not too atypical for an equity financing deal, it kind of sort of follows a template, but you can't just expect that always on page 23 there's going to be this particular piece of data that you can extract. And so these deterministic computers that we worked with prior to AI just couldn't deal with that very well. Well, now you can have an AI read the document, understand it, see what's going on, and extract the right information. But then what you need to do is you need to have multiple AIs do this multiple times and compare their answers to make sure that you're getting the right data that's pulled out of those documents. So that's the simple description of kind of the harness that we start to put around these AIs in order for them to read these documents and understand and then extract the right information. But in order to know what to extract, what type of document it is, all of that, these have to be defined as skills. And so these are just basically prompts, AI prompts, and we've all prompted AI. We've all, whether it's a simple thing like, hey, what time is the Knicks game tonight? Or something more complex, then, these are just prompts. And so we take these prompts and we build them into skills, and they become very, very large and very complex. And so many times these skills are they might be 10 or 15 pages long in terms of just the rules, the criteria, the background. Hey, this is the kind of document you're going to be reading. This is the data that we need. We need the data pulled out in this very specific way. And we've developed now 171 of these specialized trained skills that understand and know the private capital world extremely well. And they're able to then make sense of documents and turn it into actionable data. And that is ultimately this kind of data pipeline that happens. And because of all that harness, and because of all those that criteria, because of those specialized skills, and because every single time we get another document through, the skill gets a little bit smarter and a little bit more intelligent. And because of all of that, the data that you get out of all of this can be trusted. And that is probably the key to all of AI, is that if you used AI when it first came out in 2022, you went, oh, it's amazing, and I don't trust it at all because 90% of the answers are wrong. Well, what's happened is over time, the AI models have gotten better and they're more accurate. And then these harnesses that I'm talking about have gotten significantly better. And as a result, we've gotten to a point where we can have highly reliable, trustworthy output from these magical systems that by themselves might be very incorrect.
So it sounds like AI is almost growing up in a way. It's learning from all of its experience. It's becoming more intelligent. But like you're saying, you're still keeping those guardrails in place, and you're still, it sounds like, using that. One of those things would be having multiple AIs work on the same thing and then compare their answers. I've actually done that with a math problem, and I was shocked to see that they gave me two different answers, and it wasn't all that tough of a problem, but it was not a 9 times 9 equals 81. It was something where there was more interpretation. It needed to look at it and try to recognize a pattern. And one got it right and one got it wrong. So, and then you're also dealing with hallucination. So do you feel like, in terms of error percentage, I mean, how much would you guesstimate we've come down in percentage of error that's being made in its outputs?
So it is. It's hard to measure on an absolute basis, but the models themselves, just the core model itself, without any harness or any structure around it, they have improved dramatically. And there's a lot of benchmarking around those. And so it kind of depends on which model that you're using. But the latest Fable 5 from Anthropic that just dropped yesterday, it has a very low hallucination rate, which is not to say that it doesn't hallucinate, though. And so therein lies part of the problem, is that you still can't entirely trust it by itself to just ask it a complex question, get the answer back, and say, good, I am going to now stake my business strategy on this answer. There needs to be additional, looking at it. There needs to be additional cross-referencing, et cetera, if you're going to make any important decisions. So, I would imagine that, despite rapid increases that we're seeing in these AI models, that will still be the case for multiple years, is that we will still need to have some sort of kind of harness around these systems in order to make sure that we're getting the right answers. And basically what that is it's, in its simplest form, it's, let's take a skill, let's let two different LLMs run the exact same skill, let's compare the output. And if they don't match perfectly, then what we need to do is then we need to send it to like an AI review council to say, oh, okay, now let's decide who is the right one between doing this, or is there a third answer that's actually right? And so having this kind of harness and this kind of logic makes sense. And it's the same thing, by the way, that we do as humans, because if we have a simple decision to make, then it's fine. We can make that by ourselves. But if we have a more complex decision, then we need to think about it. And we think about it like this: that every decision is a hat, a haircut, or a tattoo. Meaning that I can change my hat immediately. My haircut, I may have to live with it for a month, maybe two, depending on how much hair I cut. I got long locks. I may take a year or two. A tattoo, I'm going to live with for a very long time. And so a hat kind of decision, you know what? It's fine. Let one LLM give us back the answer. Most of the decisions and most of the data that we are looking at in our world I would consider to be either a haircut or a tattoo level of data. And so we have to have lots of LLMs look at it. And just like if we were a human, if we were making a decision about a tattoo, we're probably not just going to walk into the tattoo parlor and make that decision right then. We're probably going to get some input, get some feedback. We're going to compare some things. We're going to see what it looks like on our body. We're going to ask our partner, et cetera, and then we'll make a decision. And so we have to do the same exact things for LLMs and for AI.
So I love that, by the way, the hat, the haircut, and the tattoo. That's a fabulous analogy that makes it seem that just really takes something that's complex and make it seem very simple. So as a business owner who's looking to grow and scale their business, how do you take what's available in terms of all of the AI tools and then begin to use them to extrapolate the data that you have in your business just every day? If it's, coming from your emails, coming from your CRMs, like how do you even get started with that? Because it sounds like in itself, AI is going to get us 85% of the way there. We still need a human to review it, but it sounds like a complicated process, or it could be a complicated process to implement into a business that is functioning. So what is your best advice on how to do that?
So be curious. That's my best advice. And what's really interesting about this world is that there's no manual. It's not like you can read a book that will get you up to speed on what's going on with AI or how to use AI. These systems are changing so incredibly rapidly. I think Anthropic is probably the best example of this. But I mean, it literally feels like every single day there are new additions and new changes and new rollouts. And so if you did fully understand it yesterday, which nobody does, you'll be outdated by the time today comes along anyway. So as a result, you just kind of have to be okay with going, okay, I'm not always going to have the most cutting edge and the latest, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. I'm trying to get real business application here. I'm not just trying to be up to speed with the latest thing that's going on. So I think kind of cut yourself some slack. Even the people who are on the very forefront of this, they complain about the same thing. They feel overwhelmed, like it's just too much. And so cut yourself some slack and don't try to be always on the latest. But I think there's a progression that we go through, and I think everybody probably needs to go through this, which is start by just querying and talking to it, and most of us are using at least ChatGPT, and it's kind of a fancy, Google search at that point in time. It's, it's everything from, hey, what can I make with the following things that I have in my refrigerator to, I'll take a picture of myself and say, hey, I'm going to this restaurant tonight with my girlfriend, is fit check, is this okay? And she'll come back and I personify her and give her feminine pronouns when she's giving me fashion advice. And she'll say, no, those shoes, Keith, they definitely need to change. You need to improve your shoes before you go to that restaurant. It's too, so anything like that, it's just like, it's a one thing, it's a query, I ask a question, I get an answer back, and it's just very simple and contained. So that's kind of step one. Step two, though, is when we start to think about can it make a decision about larger things? So what if I gave it access to my Gmail and connected it to my Gmail, and there's connectors with every one of these, and you can just simply ask, and if you don't know how to, by the way, you can just say, how do I connect my Gmail? And AI will tell you how to connect your Gmail. And so any questions that you have, don't ask anybody else, just ask your AI and it'll point you in the right direction to the next thing. And so when you do that, then you start to have what's called context engineering. And so now my AI has the context of all my email. And so I can still ask it simple questions, but now it has more context than just its own understanding because now it has access to my email. So that's a good example of still being in this kind of query answer kind of mode, but with additional context. And then we get to the next level, which is, let me automate a workflow. This is something that I do every week. I do payroll every week. And so payroll, I don't enjoy payroll. I don't like doing busy work, et cetera. And so I have worked with Cloud Cowork, and I've created a skill, and I've created a scheduled process where every single day Claude wakes up and says, hey, is today payroll day? And it says, oh, no, it's, today is payroll day minus 7 days. Okay, I don't need to do anything. I'm going to go to sleep. And then eventually on payroll day minus 3 days, Claude wakes up and says, oh, I need to make sure that I, contact all of our international contractors and remind them and send them a Slack and remind them to put their payroll hours into the payroll. And then he does that job, and then he goes back to sleep. And then he wakes up the next day and goes, okay, now I need to make sure that I have everything all ready to go for Keith for tomorrow to send out the wires. And I'm going to make sure all the spreadsheets are ready. And then on payroll day, he says, Keith, don't forget, you got to send the payroll. Here's the wires. They're all set up for you to go. And then when I get done, then he goes again and checks and makes sure that I sent the right amount and that nothing got incorrect, and updates our financials. And he's off, and then he goes to sleep again and does the same process again. So that is an example of an agentic workflow where I'm embedded. I still send the wires, so I don't have to worry about Claude sending the wrong wire to the wrong person. But all the busy work and all those little tasks get taken out of the process for me, and it's on an agentic flow that does it all by itself. And so those are kind of three good examples of kind of the maturation of where you can go and start to be able to really get real business value.
Wow, that sounds really exciting, actually. Obviously, I'm still thinking in the back of my mind, how are we protecting if I'm hooking it up to my email and I have sensitive company information in there? How do I need to be thinking about protecting certain pieces of information from others? Can I instruct it, for instance, to pay attention to things coming from particular senders and ignore others? So can we get it to be that fancy? Is it already that fancy?
It is that fancy. Yep, that's good news. So Claude is a good example of this. And so I'll use Claude as a reference point just because I think it's probably the most advanced in this particular area, and all the models are always leapfrogging each other, et cetera. So if you use Codex or something else, that's fine as well. But Claude is a downloadable app now that you can download. Of course, it's the name of the model itself as well. But you can download the Claude app, and within the Claude app, then you have kind of three functionalities. You can chat, which is just that interaction that we were talking about in the beginning. Just I make a query and I get a response. You can do co-work, which is these agentic flows like I was describing for payroll, or you can do Claude Code. Claude Code is much more complex for engineers, et cetera, and it's fascinating and amazing and wonderful. But if you're just getting up to speed, I'd stay away from Claude Code and stick with the chat or with co-work. And so what happens though is that all of these connectors become really, really important, and so they provide the context. And so I will connect Claude to my Google Drive. We use Google Drive for all of our file storage. I will connect it to my calendar, so he knows all my calendar information and all of that stuff. I'll connect it to my email, and I connect it to our production database, to our code repo, all these sources of information that I would, as a person, need to go and get information. Now I want my agent to go there. What's interesting is that because Claude then shares my own credentials, he only has the same rights that I have. And so at a maximum, he can only do the same things that I could do. But in addition to that, within these connectors, you can also set all sorts of rights and privileges. And you can go through, and I think with Gmail, I think there's something like 37 different rights, privileges. So it gets very wonky and granular. You can say, I want to be able to, he always has to ask me before he does this, or he can always do it all by himself. And so you can really set all of those. And then in addition to that, as you build out your skills, you can also then have Claude either work independently or always have to have a human in the loop. And so as an example, I have one project that Claude works on where he gets to work completely independently, and that is go and get software vendor discounts. And so as a startup, if you're funded in the venture capital world, what happens is there's a whole bunch of software vendors out there that say, hey, we'll give you free credits to come and experiment with our technology in hopes that you build on our platform, and then you're locked in. And then once you get properly funded and get real customers, then you're locked in and you'll be using us forever. And so I said, Claude, what I want you to do is go look at look where we spend money on all the vendors, and then go and do research and figure out if they have a software startup credits program, and then go and apply for it wherever it is. Sometimes you have to email them. Sometimes you have to do a link on the website. It's very time consuming. You have to say all sorts of things about the company. Claude manages that entirely by himself. He has gotten so far, drum roll, $350,000 in startup credits for us, all by himself, entirely on his own, with vendors that we spend money on. And that is as good as $350,000 in cash in the bank for us. And that has been an autonomous project he's done through co-work entirely on his own.
Wow, that is really impressive. Oh my goodness. So that goes right to your bottom line as a business owner. That's money you did not have to spend. And that, exactly. Wow. And not to mention all of the time that it saved you, because you may not wanted to have been the person that was doing that. So you might potentially have needed someone to actually sit there and do that kind of work. So that's a great example of automating something that maybe somebody really never wanted to do, like some of the lower quality tasks that have tremendous value. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a
So
great example of task loss, not job loss. I didn't lose my job in that scenario. In fact, I just reallocated my time to doing more interesting things, but I got rid of a task and an administrative task that I definitely didn't want to do, but I got the value out of it. And I didn't have to sit there and go, well, I got to decide between doing this next sales call and trying to get more startup credits. Was able to just set Claude loose on that and go max that out. And I came back, I would go look at these email strings, and sometimes it was 17 or 18 email strings back and forth with Claude is negotiating, because I've given him, negotiating skills and told him, don't just take their first offer, make sure that you really push on this. And you go back and you look, and it's just fascinating to see, how engaged he has been in this process in order to be able to really work hard. It's not just filling out forms, it's doing all this other work in order to be able to get those credits.
do they know that they're negotiating with AI on the other side? So they actually think that potentially they're talking to you or to someone else?
Everybody gets to decide when you set up your agents like this. You can decide you want to give them your own, your own credentials, and you want to set up a fictitious user with fictitious or with their own account that could log into Gmail and do all that kind of stuff. Which there's a time and a place for that, certainly in certain contexts. In this particular context, I was having Claude just be me and use my Gmail, use my account, respond as me, etc. I would not let Claude do that with investors. I don't yet let Claude do that with customers. I review everything that goes out before. I do let Claude communicate with employees, but only if he says that he's Claude first. I don't want any employees to get confused between what Keith is telling them and what Claude is telling them. And since Claude is slacking our own teammates with my credentials, he always has to start out every conversation with an employee, this is Claude, and then he communicates what he needs to communicate. And so there's a lot of automated processes that we have. Claude effectively runs the operational side of our business. And so a lot of that is happening automatically, but we want to make sure it's clear, certainly in certain context, if they're talking to AI or not.
He sounds like your right-hand man, operationally speaking.
He gave himself the title of Keith's chief of staff, and I said that's a perfect title, and so we're going with it. And so he actually says, "This is Claude, Keith's AI chief of staff," and so that's usually how he introduces himself.
Oh, I love that. So, and how do your employees respond to that?
It's interesting. Differently over the course of kind of in the last 3.5 years that the AI trend has been happening here. In the early days, pretty negative reactions. Now, granted, the AI was almost always wrong in those days, and you couldn't really rely on the AI to do those things. So it's just been honestly within the last 3 to 6 months that we've been able to start to have these autonomous processes, because the models have only gotten there. So if you did try these systems 9 months ago and you said, they're garbage, they won't get there, you were probably right. The world has changed in that time frame. Really, in November, December of 2025 is when the models really got to a point where they started to be. I joked for a long time that the one constant with AI is that it is almost awesome. And in January of this year was the first time I went, I think it's awesome. And then I had to revert that and say, well, maybe almost awesome again. But it's vacillating between awesome and almost awesome at this point in time, whereas before it was only almost awesome.
Well, we as humans are not, perfect, and we make mistakes too. So it stands to reason that, we're creating AI, we're teaching it, we're helping it evolve. It's going to make mistakes right alongside of us. I don't think we can ever expect anything that we're building to ever be perfect. But the beauty of that is, you can never really get it wrong because you can never really get it done. Is we're always moving, progress over perfection, I think. So that's fantastic. So if I'm a business owner and I'm listening and I really want to start to think about AI, bringing that into my business to better understand, we started out in this conversation talking about how to extrapolate data and make sense out of it. And you've transitioned us all the way over to, consideration for a chief of staff within your own company that's actually doing certain operational aspects without needing a lot of supervision from you. And so I'm imagining we've got people listening who are thinking, I'm relating to that. So what is your one takeaway for anybody who's listening on how they can actively get started with really weaving AI into their business processes?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to in that framework that I gave of you start out in a query mode, and then you go to context plus query, and then you go to agentic workflows. And if we kind of think about it as kind of those three steps, and all three, even when you get to the agentic workflows, you're still going to have these other two steps periodically as well. Every once in a while, you're going to say, "Hey, I need to put together an investor deck," and it's going to be you're going to be back in kind of query mode and interacting with the AI in that context. But for these automated processes, et cetera, you'll find that there's a lot of things in this agentic world that we can be doing. But I think the biggest thing is to find your aha moment, or if I can say your holy shit moment, in each one of those three categories. And so I remember very early on with ChatGPT having my holy shit moment where I was like, it's really cool to be able to walk out the door, and this is when I was single and I was dating, and I was like, and say fit check and get a fit check and get real valid feedback, that was, that would make me adjust my behavior. And that was a holy shit moment. So we all got to find our like, oh, this is really useful for me in that context. And then you kind of graduate to the next moment. And then it was like, okay, well, what if I provide all this additional context and all this additional information, and connect it to all these other sources in my Gmail and my calendar, et cetera? Then, now I'm still in answer and query mode, but can I get to a holy shit moment? So a good example of this is connect Claude to your calendar and say, hey, let's come up with a color coding scheme for my calendar so it'll be easier for me to read, because I just have too many meetings and they're all blue, and I don't want them all to be blue. And my only color coding is, green is personal and blue is work, and let's do more. And so Claude will come up with a really nice color code and then go, great, now go ahead and change my calendar and make everything fit. And 7 minutes later, you'll come back and go, oh my goodness, I would have never done that because that would have taken me forever to go and do. And now I have this beautifully color-coded calendar. So whatever it is, find your little thing that's still like context plus query, and you get a holy shit moment there. And now you can graduate to the agentic holy shit moment. And so like a good holy shit moment for me was we need to do a new 409A. And so today we're getting away giving stock options to our employees. And so we need to do a new 409A. Well, the software service that we use, you have to fill out this big long form, and it's like 8 pages long. You have to type all this information about yourself. Well, because I've given Claude all the context about GoodStream, and he knows the strategy, he's written all the copy for our website. He knows, he's written all the copy for our investor deck, or, teamed up with me, but we have teamed up on all of these things. So he knows all this context and all this information. And so now I go, hey, Claude, I got an email from our vendor for a 409A. Go check my email, grab that email. There's a form there. Can you fill out the 409A form? And then when you're done, all the stock options that we've been working on, can you make sure that those get filed properly through our system? And Claude will map out a plan, do all of that, surf the web, click on the buttons, fill out the forms, do all the things that I don't want to do, and fill them out perfectly. And I did ask him, make sure you just check with me before we hit the final form, just so I can give it one more review, and then we'll review it, and then he'll, do the paperwork for the stock options. And so I have these software, solutions that are kind of annoying to interact with, and I have to spend a lot of time with. Well, now I don't have to do that anymore, because if I can click it and see it on my computer screen, so can Claude, and he can go and do that work himself, and I can go do more interesting things. And so if you find your holy shit moment in each one of these different tranches, I think you'll find that it's easier than to graduate to the next one.
Fantastic. So Keith, tell everybody how they can connect with you. What is the best way to find you? LinkedIn, socials, website?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I'm if you just search for Keith Smith and GoodStream is all one word. On LinkedIn, you'll find me. Check out goodstream.com, and you can see what we're all about. And certainly, if you are in the world of private capital investing, and you're saying, my portfolio is a bit of a mess, and I don't really know what each of my company's worth. In fact, I'm trying to remember how many companies I have in my portfolio. That's a common thing that angel investors will have. If you're at a venture capital world, and you're saying, geez, I need to figure out how to be able to get, updated valuations, at the end of the quarter from my general partner, or I need to be able to be audit ready at the end of the year. Those are the kinds of things that GoodStream does incredibly well. Please reach out to us. But if you're just curious, I'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn, and love to continue the conversation there too.
All right, Keith, thanks so much for being our guest today. Okay, everybody. So if you're listening to this conversation and you're thinking, you're excited now, you're inspired, you want to figure out how to start to weave AI into your business, whether it's something simple like connecting to your Gmail, or, setting colors for your calendar, all the way through to how can I set up a chief of staff in my own business to automate things that I don't want to do anymore, and even to save money on certain tools that your company is using. This is a great place to start with AI. So if you're looking for more information, get out onto the internet, get out onto LinkedIn, connect with Keith. All right, everybody, thanks again for joining us. And until next time.